We all know what they say excuses are like, but to be honest, while everyone certainly has them, not all excuses are created equal. Some are far more outrageous and implausible than others.
My back is broken.
What, a vertebrae or what portion?
Spinal.
And while the favorite phrase of all athletes is not to make any excuses directly before they proceed to make excuses, it's only natural after a loss that might feel bad or embarrassing to get the urge to explain to everyone what it is you think happened. And of course, nobody goes into fight night 100% healthy. But even with all that said, the 10 reasons for losing on our list today were probably a stretch even for these fighters' most hardcore supporters and fans. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are 10 fighters who made absolutely ridiculous excuses for losing. Number 10. Conor McGregor. It's one of the most famous excuses on our list, and rightfully so, as it was given by the most famous fighter in MMA history in the biggest fight of his career. UFC 229 did not go Conor's way, although he was the first ever fighter to win a round against Khabib Nurmagomedov. By the fourth, though, the accumulative smeshing was too much, and a neck crank sealed the deal. There were many who felt Conor seemed off in the bout, not himself. There were rumors of a lot of backstage nonsense before walkouts, a bad camp, perhaps a Rocky III scenario where his opponent wasn't taken seriously. Less than a year later, in a now notorious interview with Ariel Helwani on ESPN, Conor repeatedly explained that he broke his foot 3 weeks before the fight, and as such was unable to train as he would have liked. Now, this in and of itself doesn't really warrant a spot on our list. That type of thing happens all the time. But it was Conor's repeated claim that his foot was like a balloon, which makes this excuse now infamous.
I must understand my foot was a balloon when I walked into that fight.
His foot was so swollen, in fact, he claimed all of his toes came out of their sockets and had to be forced back in. Many have noted that 3 weeks out from a break that severe, Conor shouldn't have been able to repeatedly stomp his feet as hard as he did in the cage right before the fight began. Whatever the case, my foot was a balloon will forever be a part of the MMA lexicon now.
It's like a balloon.
Number 9. Rampage Jackson. Fighters are a paranoid bunch. Maybe it's simply because so much can go wrong leading into fight night, and thus any sort of sabotage would be incredibly effective, even if it's highly unlikely. Rampage Jackson's first fight outside the United States was a big break for him. He would be taking on the legendary Kazushi Sakuraba at Pride 15. Maybe it was being so far from home, maybe it was the fact that he lost the fight about 6 minutes in via rear naked choke, but years later, Rampage would claim that he believed someone may have poisoned his room service. Not that the food was bad, that somebody specifically poisoned him. Jackson then went on to explain how Pride wanted Sakuraba to win and forced him to cut down his weight, despite there not being any regulations about it. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure Pride absolutely wanted Kazushi to win, but to say that they sent Jackson poisoned food may be a bit much. This isn't the only conspiracy Quentin has claimed against him, though. Prior to his bout with John Jones, he alleged there were spies in his camp sent by the light heavyweight champion. If something was wrong with Page at Pride 15, it certainly didn't look like it. He attempted to slam Sakuraba about 17 times in those 5 minutes and didn't look a bit exhausted while doing it. Maybe it was the nerves of such a big stage for the first time, or maybe Pride poisoned him. Number 8. Diego Sanchez. From one poisoning to another. There wasn't anything obviously bad about Diego Sanchez's performance against Miles Jury at UFC 171. While he would lose unanimously on the scorecards with 2 judges giving all 3 rounds to Jury, Sanchez looked as he always does. But whenever he would attempt to engage in a brawl, as he has done so often in his career, Miles kept him at distance, kept the fight tactical. It was a bad stylistic matchup for the Nightmare, but it wasn't a performance where anyone would question or assume something was wrong with Diego. Nonetheless, the tough winner took to Twitter after the bout to explain the loss. Turns out he had had some bad steak tartare after weigh-ins. Now, for those of you who don't dine at the finest restaurants, and I would be one of you, tartare is raw ground beef with a raw egg on top. Sounds absolutely disgusting. And while raw beef is usually okay to consume, you're just asking for trouble when you throw a raw quail egg on top. Sanchez claims the post-weigh-in meal had him vomiting all day before his fight. And if you've ever had food poisoning, yeah, it's pretty much death on a toilet. My favorite bit of the explanation was that this was not part of the Dolce diet. Good to know. Whether it was bad beef and eggs that caused the performance, or Jury choosing a more tactical approach to the fight, steak tartare is one hell of an excuse for a loss. I guess the lesson is to save the raw food for after you win. Number 7. TIKI GHOSN. Losing is a bitter pill to swallow, and so much so that oftentimes we spit it right back out and choose our own reality. Case in point, TIKI GHOSN, who fought a 20-year-old Robbie Lawler at UFC 40 in 2002. Going only by Tiki on the broadcast.
What name?
Who are you, Seal?
GHOSN believed the up-and-coming Lawler was all filler, no killer, a hype job. He found out 89 seconds into the fight that was not the case when he was dropped and knocked out cold by a vicious shot on the ground. Post-fight in the cage, Jeff Osborne dickishly asked Tiki if he would take back his sentiment about Lawler being a bit overrated. GHOSN's reply, nah, I got cut. They stopped it because of a cut. Whether it was the fact that he had just suffered a concussion, or his team told him the cut was the reason it was stopped, or he simply refused to believe he was knocked out, the crowd was having none of it, booing wildly as Robbie and Tiki shared an awkward smile. Osborne continued his dickish ways by then asking Robbie to walk us through the KO, or as Tiki called it, a cut. Look, it's definitely a ridiculous excuse, it's why it's on the list. But the man just got sent to the upside down by Robbie Lawler, let's cut him a little bit of slack. Number 6. Alistair Overeem. This one just hurts my soul. Poor Overeem. We're at UFC 203 in Cleveland, Ohio, home of the heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic. This is one of the better single-round title fights in history. Lots of action. Both fighters hurt at different times. It ended with 30 seconds left as Stipe was bouncing Alistair's head off the canvas like he got a starring role in Space Jam 2. What a moment. The crowd blew the roof off the place. Stipe gave a great post-fight interview that nobody could understand, and then the microphone was given to Overeem. Now, Joe Rogan has said many times that he doesn't like interviewing fighters when they were just KO'd, but I have to say, the coherence with which Alistair does this interview and the details he has about what happened in the fight would lead me to believe this ridiculous excuse was something he believed before he was knocked unconscious. After graciously thanking Stipe and congratulating him, the Reem had one little note about the fight. See, early on he dropped the champ and got him in a guillotine choke, and as he put it,
and I clearly felt a tap.
Being the investigative journalist that he is, Rogan asked the production truck to show the sequence again. When no tap was found, the crowd of course lost their minds and started grabbing their pitchforks. And instead of just calling it there, Joe asked for another angle, which again did not show any kind of tap. My god, this was brutal. All Class Overeem took it in stride though, and thanked the city for being such great hosts as they booed him like he was from Cincinnati. Number 5. Jon Jones. In addition to being arguably the greatest fighter of all time, Jon Jones might also be the greatest maker of excuses. 12 to 6 elbows are stupid.
Look at it. Those people that thinks it is.
Yeah, and really, it's
My phone was stolen. My account was hacked. I didn't know she was pregnant. Gas station boner drugs are filled with steroids. I have residual pulsing picograms in my system. So on and so forth. But the greatest and certainly most ridiculous excuse came when Jones simply had no explanation. The male performance enhancer defense did in part work after his failure prior to UFC 200, but following the taking away of his victory against Daniel Cormier in their rematch at UFC 214 for yet another failed drug test, there was unfortunately for Jones no smoking dick pill, no supplement he could point to. So how did he then explain what happened to the California State Athletic Commission during their hearing? Well, in a roundabout way, the only explanation he could come to was that someone who doesn't like him slipped performance enhancers into his food or water.
Yeah. You know what? There's a jet stream of bullshit coming out of your mouth, my friend.
Okay. Not the strongest case when something is found in your system, but the only other explanation left would be knowingly ingesting it, so of course it had to be the one-armed man. To his credit, the excuse seemed to stick pretty well in John's mind. In fact, a month after his bout with Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 232, Jones told ESPN's Brett Okamoto that he no longer accepts food or drinks from anyone, citing an example of a friend sending over some cookies. I love it. I love Jon Jones. Number 4. MINOTAURO Nogueira. There are two reasons that the legendary MINOTAURO Nogueira gave for his loss to Frank Mir at UFC 140, and both are ridiculous. The fight marked a significant milestone and a massive feather in Frank's cap, the first time in Nogueira's 10-plus year, 42-fight career that he had ever lost via submission. This is, of course, the arm-breaking Kimura. The classic image of Nogueira staring blankly at his arm like Michael Myers after a kill will haunt your dreams forever. And while Antonio certainly had solid excuses for his first loss to Mir at UFC 92, when he went into the bout battling a staph infection and with a knee that had been shredded like a block of cheddar cheese on taco night, his reasoning for the loss at 140, not so strong. The sequence that would be the beginning of the end for the former Pride champion was when he appeared to have the fight won with ground strikes via TKO and instead decided to go for a guillotine choke, which would lead to the Kimura finish by Mir. The first reason Big Nog gave days after the fight really makes no sense at all. He told Globo he wanted to finish the fight beautifully, and so he wanted to win with a submission instead of just throwing a few more punches and getting the TKO. Okay, Nogueira himself called the idea stupid, and maybe that's why a week later he changed his tune. It was actually Herb Dean's fault, as he warned Nogueira not to punch the back of the head. So instead of doing like every other fighter in MMA history when they are warned about that and slightly change the trajectory of their punch, MINOTAURO claimed it forced him into the submission attempt, which led to his loss. Well, fuck you Herb Dean then, I guess. Number 3. KARO PARISYAN. Oh boy, here we go. PARISYAN was certainly a top-tier welterweight in the late 2000s, and if you asked him, it was the fact that he was so good that ended up being the reason for his loss to Thiago Alves at UFC Fight Night 13. The second round TKO halted the momentum PARISYAN had gathered towards a potential title fight in the division, and a few months later, prior to his cancelled bout with Yoshiyuki Yoshida at UFC 88, the Heat explained what it was that happened, saying, quote, "My worst enemy has always been that I've been too talented to train, and now it's catching up with me. I gotta start training, or those guys will start catching up with me." It would appear they already did. Now, not taking your training seriously is certainly something that does happen from time to time to fighters, and maybe a few of them have thought they were good enough to go without training. John Jones famously claims to not have prepared really for the first Gustafsson fight, but to word it as "I'm too talented to train," to actually say that out loud to someone else, it's just one of the all-time great ridiculous excuses. There seems to be some belief that it was in fact issues with painkillers that caused KARO's loss, but the back injury that started that problem came after the Alves fight, and PARISYAN has said on numerous occasions that he just never took training seriously before the loss to Thiago. Number 2. Nick Diaz. What didn't people do to sabotage Nick Diaz's title fight with George St. Pierre at UFC 158? If you recall, the big controversy beforehand was about the weigh-ins. Diaz released a video he made in secret of a UFC exec telling him that if he or George were over the limit, less than a pound, the commission wouldn't factor in the extra weight. Diaz claimed that St. Pierre was overweight, possibly by even more, and filed a formal complaint which was eventually thrown out as there was no evidence. It should be noted that the commission in Quebec had always had a policy of excluding decimals at weigh-ins well before the event. Then right before the fight, there was Diaz's team claiming that something had been done to the wraps, and that GSPs looked suspicious. Nothing came of this either. After 9 takedowns and nearly 14 minutes of control time, St. Pierre would win 50-45 on all 3 judges' cards. Years later, Nick would claim that his IV after weigh-ins was poisoned before the fight, citing a particularly long sleep he had that night, a full 14 hours, feeling sluggish as he entered the bout despite being in the best shape of his life. To be fair, he didn't think George had anything to do with all the cheating, but that it was people around him who wanted to ensure he didn't get stalked and slapped all around the cage that night. GSP hilariously confessed to Joe Rogan on his podcast that it was him all along.
So the alien abduct me and put a gamma ray to increase my strength like the Hulk.
Number 1. Tito Ortiz. The most ridiculous excuse on our list comes in a fight that honestly didn't really need any kind of excuses. Yes, Tito Ortiz lost to Forrest Griffin at UFC 106, but it was a very competitive fight. One judge even saw it for Tito. A third-round surge by Griffin secured him the victory, but by no means would anyone have considered Ortiz's performance to be one requiring an excuse, especially considering that the newest member of the Huntington Beach City Council was returning after a nearly 2-year layoff due to back surgery. Even so, Tito simply couldn't help himself. After Griffin mentioned injuring his foot during his camp, when it came time for Tito to address the crowd, he wanted it to be known that he too struggled in camp, only sparring once. When Joe Rogan asked him what the injury was, well, if you're on Fight Pass, it goes right into him talking about his back. But if you saw this event live, Ortiz cites a cracked skull as the reason for his performance and why he has a black eye. When the crowd began to boo because having a cracked skull makes no sense, Griffin grabbed the mic to chime back in and explain to the crowd that sometimes fighters get hurt training for fights. Good guy Forrest Griffin. And too true. But forgive me if the image of a cracked skull conjures up X-ray moves from Mortal Kombat. If Tito did have a broken skull, it healed like fucking Wolverine, as the injury was absent from his post-fight medical suspension information. A big thank you to Ben Rosette, who provided that sweet tune you heard in the intro. Check out his music by clicking the link in the description and go give him a follow on his Instagram and Twitter page at Ben Rosette. Huge shout out to the legendary once and future King Tomas Welsh for editing this video together. Follow him on Instagram at Big Beat Visual. That's beat as in the band from Doug and not a forceful strike. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter and have yourself a wonderful day.